A Quiet Place is directed by John Krasinski and stars him as well as Emily Blunt, Noah Jupe and Millicent Simmonds. Most of you should know the premise to this movie because I'm one of the last people to review this film, but for those of you that don't know, I'll just do a quick reminder of what the premise of the film is. The movie basically follows a small family trying to live in this kind of post-apocalyptic world where there's these creatures roaming around that can't see, they can't smell, but they are immediately attracted to noise. The only thing they can do is hear, and they hear very well. So basically this family has to live their entire life in silence. If they make a single noise, they're dead. Now, I think I, like most people, were immediately drawn to this movie because of its incredibly simple premise. I am a sucker for any thriller that tries to stick to one premise for the entire runtime. Movies like Green Room, 10 Cloverfield Lane and Don't Breathe, which all funnily enough came out in the same year. I really like those movies because they just stick to one premise for a very short runtime and make that premise work. And that's kind of why I love A Quiet Place as well. It takes that very simple concept and stretches it to its extremes pretty much. To the point where by the end of the movie, you can't really think of what else they could have done with that premise. They've pretty much done as much as they could do with such a simple concept. And the reason this simple concept works so well in this movie is down to two reasons. One, John Krasinski's solid direction of this movie, and the sound design. John Krasinski directs the shit out of this movie. There are a few times where the direction doesn't really feel that special, but to be honest, if the direction was like uber flashy, you'd kind of lose the point of the movie. So I like the fact that there are a few moments where the camera work especially feels very, held back and doesn't do these kind of outlandish and flashy things. It just knows the right time when to use certain shots, and I think that's what you really need in a movie like this. And John Krasinski manages to get some really gorgeous looking shots, but also some really tense moments as well that kind of perfectly blend together. And like I said, that mixed with the sound design, which is pretty spot on for what I can say, really makes for a incredibly tense experience. There's probably one of the most tense and intense moments I've had in a cinema. Like, if you've seen any of my videos in the past, you will know that I'm not a huge fan of the horror genre, but I can outright admit that this movie was downright terrifying at times. I thought the performances were all really great as well, especially seeing that you're only stuck with this family and you rarely see anyone else in the entire film. John Krasinski and Emily Blunt work really well together. They have great chemistry, and that's kind of a given, seeing that they're an actual real-life married couple. So their performances are really good, but also when they're apart, they work really well on their own and with the two kids in the movie. Emily Blunt, there is one scene in particular where she really shines, and I thought she was really good in this movie. And John Krasinski, it's nice to see him doing something different to The Office, especially in terms of the direction and his acting, but he is fantastic here. And the two child actors as well, it goes without saying, but they are really good. Noah Jupe, who plays the young boy in the movie, doesn't really get that much to do to begin with, but towards the end of the movie he does have some things to do, and he's really good for what you see of him. But the standout is probably Millicent Simmonds, who is this deaf girl in the movie, who's actually deaf in real life. She's really good. I wouldn't say she's fantastic, but she is really good, especially seeing like the situation that she is in real life and the way she has to work around certain things in this movie. I thought she was fantastic, and together as a whole family they really work because they do feel and work like a real family. Also, the monster in this movie is really cool, but in a kind of horrific way. I really like the design on it. It's pretty cool and unique, especially in regards to the certain things that it does. I really like the look of that monster. It's really unsettling to look at, and for a movie like this I'm really glad they went the route of like Jaws and the original Alien, where you don't actually see the creature that much in the majority of the movie, but it's only towards the end where you see the full creature, and the payoff is actually really good because it is a really interesting monster thing to look at, but it is also kind of unsettling, and you kind of can't take your eyes off it in that sense. But it is a really cool design. It's unlike really anything I've seen before. There's a little bit of other like horror creatures in there that kind of blend to make this one creature. But I really liked it. The look of it is really creepy and like bony. I won't give away too much, but it is really cool to look at. And the sound it makes is just really unnerving. I also really like the score for this movie. It knew just the right time when to build up, and there are a lot of moments in this movie, like I kind of hinted at earlier, that just rely on no sound whatsoever. I mean, it's called A Quiet Place, and the premise is about a family trying to stay quiet or otherwise they make a noise. So the sounds you do hear are very sparse, but when they do happen, they work really well. But the majority of the movie is pure silence, and there are very few moments where you get scenes of dialogue. I would say there's like 2 scenes of actual people talking. Apart from that, the rest of the movie is just pure silence with a few bits of score scattered around. And the best thing I loved about the sound and the music and all of that is the fact that when they really wanted to build up tension at the right point with the family, it goes absolutely quiet. But when there's moments of dread and genuine horror, and people are, in genuine... when you think people are about to die and people are running around everywhere, that's when the music starts to build up, so the silence doesn't become straight out terrifying, it becomes more tense. So there's like a good balance there. When it goes full out silence, it's genuinely terrifying because a noise could happen at any single moment, but then the score manages to seep in, then building the tension even more and kind of lessening the horror so that there's a good balance of the two. However, with all that being said, this movie is not perfect, and there are a couple of nitpicks that I noticed throughout the movie that aren't enough to hold the movie back from being great, because I really liked this movie, and as a horror thriller combo, it works incredibly well. But unfortunately, when you are aware of these nitpicks, they just kind of stay in your head, and they are quite annoying once they're there. The first nitpick I have is in regards to the jump scares in this movie. Now, most of the jump scares work really well in this film because, like I said a minute ago, most of this movie is silence. So when a noise does happen, it's obviously going to be loud and it's going to be startling. So in that sense, the majority of the jump scares work. There are a couple of false ones that do feel false when they happen, and they are quite annoying. But again, that's nothing too drastic to take away from the moment, because they feel somewhat warranted. The main problem I have with the jump scares, though, is that there are 2 jump scares in particular that are a result of characters in the movie doing somewhat stupid things. For example, there's one near the start of the movie which involves a kid. If you've seen the trailer for the movie, you kind of know where I'm going with this. But yeah, he makes a really stupid decision, and it leads to a jump scare, and in some sense a really, a turning point in the movie. But it's just a really stupid thing to happen, and I'm just like... I was just thinking about it, going like, come on, that wouldn't happen in real life. But after that happened, I kind of forgave the movie and just went on with it. But then there is a moment later on in the movie involving Emily Blunt's character. Again, I won't go into too much detail, but she's just been through an incredibly tense situation. And she does something to make herself known to the other characters, and that alone is both a jump scare and it's giving away her position to the monsters. I mean, it's just a small little thing, especially that second one, but it's just kind of annoying when it happens, because they've set up all these rules about what sounds do and do not attract the monsters, and they've set up this entire thing that you're kind of going with for the movie and you're on board with it, but when they do these stupid things, it does kind of feel quite annoying. The other nitpick I have with this movie is regarding a specific plot point that gets addressed, I would say, like halfway through the movie. I won't go into specifics because it is a spoiler, but once they have made this thing aware to the audience, it then serves as a major plot hole when things happen later in the movie, because they address this thing, and then the rest of the movie happens, and you suddenly think to yourself, once the movie's over, all of that final half of the movie could have been completely diverted and could not have happened at all if they just, utilised the thing they addressed earlier in the film. Again, I won't go into specifics because it is a major spoiler, but it is quite frustrating when you think about it, because they could have they could have just passed by all of the shit that happens in the final act by just going with that thing they addressed earlier in the movie. So yeah, besides those problems that I had with the movie, this is still a top-notch horror thriller that I cannot recommend enough. If you're a fan of horror, or if you're not, I still highly recommend A Quiet Place, because like I said before, I'm not a huge fan of horror movies. But this really did surprise me, because if anything, it felt like a thriller first and then kind of went for the horror second. And if anything, there's actually quite a lot of family drama scattered throughout both of those things to make it feel, all of the stuff in the movie feel warranted. So I really cannot recommend this movie enough, and I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. I really enjoyed this movie. I would happily see it again, but those problems, unfortunately, are quite glaring when you really think about them. So guys, that was my review of A Quiet Place. I apologise for it being so late. If you enjoyed the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Bye!